Hel- Unmute, Mohamed and Erika. Hello, everyone. Hello, Erika.
Hello.
Hello, Mohamed. How are you guys?
Hi,
Good.
very, very good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure for us. So welcome everyone to this second episode of the Go Big series. Today we have our guest Erika Kaneko that will present in a few seconds. Just to go back quickly with my partner here, Mohamed, we are here with Koga. We created a startup studio. We help entrepreneurs launch their startups from scratch by building their MVP, their app, also the marketing. On the marketing side, business side, legal side, will help them. So we have our one-stop shop for them. And then at the end, I will highlight we just launched a new Launchpad program for entrepreneurs where we invest in each idea. So I'll be more than welcome to present it very quickly, and you'll be welcome to apply. But now let's talk about our guest today, Erika Kaneko, who's the founder of Kaneko Law. She's a startup advisor, so she helped a lot of companies from the beginning, from the start until to acquisition and IPOs. So she has a strong experience on what's happening from the beginning, and then to have a high valuation to get the startups with to be able to get an acquisition and get them to the IPO. But the best one, and she's our partner. She working with us with the startups, but she will be like in a few words. Erika, it's better for you to talk and say a few words about your company, what you founded, and how you have the.
Sure. Absolutely. Thank you so much for the warm introduction. So as you mentioned, I'm a corporate attorney based in New York. I'm the founder and principal of Kaneko Law, which is a boutique law firm that advises founders and CEOs as they make strategic, informed decisions to grow and scale their businesses. So, as a fellow founder, I'm very passionate about meeting other people who, are getting started with their own ventures, and I find it very exciting to be present at the very beginning to be able to support and help out. So thank you so much for having me today.
Yeah, more
You're
than
welcome.
So today the topic, so we're here. It's about we're going to talk, and you're going to give your inputs and also help the community in that part, like how for start in these economic downturns, what like legal strategy can be put it in place, and like the tips and like the some one-on-one guides you can just come up, and then at the end, of course, there will be questions Q&As from the audience to so that you'll be able to reply. So, but one the first thing is like like when an entrepreneur starts a startup starts, they're like, okay, they're focused on their product, their business, and then okay, we need, and there's this legal part where there's a lot of things that they saw. Do we need to take a legal partner from the scratch from now? Oh, I'm scared. They're scared that the cost will be like very high. Are they ready for it? And that's one of the big questions. So how would you say, like, to start, what do you think, like what is needed, or how would you communicate like this? How will an entrepreneur will communicate with you, like you, for example, Erika, on the legal advice from the start?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. And I do work with a number of founders from the very beginning, sometimes even before they formed an entity, when they're just at the idea stage, they're about to build the MVP. And so I hear this question a lot. People say, I know lawyers can be very expensive. How do I know my starting capital, what little money I'm starting with is being put to good use? And I would encourage founders to think about it in terms of managing risk. So your legal advisor, at least at the very beginning, you should think of them, or you could think of them as a strategic partner to help you as you are guiding the company to think ahead about what risks and pitfalls could lie, before you as you continue to build. Many startups are successful in part because they are able to move so rapidly and adapt. However, sometimes the unexpected does occur, and then if the groundwork had not particularly been laid early on to address and correct such problems or issues, can become very time consuming and costly, and unfortunately might detract from the energy, time, and money that would be better spent building your business and building your product. So, having a strategic partner in that way to even discuss at the very beginning, what are your plans? How do you expect to grow? Who are your stakeholders? They may be able to just ask some really good questions, even if you're not at the stage of negotiating contracts or any sort of commercial activity yet. So that's one way that early stage founders could think about it.
Yeah, you're right. That's I was like going to catch up on what you were saying. That's at the beginning, like, you say, okay, I'll try to like my first contracts, or I'll be able to do my first legal assets. But as you were saying, like, this is a lot of, you think it's easy, or it's simple, but no, not so much, and it's a lot time
Mhm.
consuming to have it like perfectly going. Because if you sign a contract that's not good, even with your first client, you can like
Mhm.
you can have the bad result or the bad effects like a long time after if you work well. So that's why, as you said, versus like the time consuming you'll need, versus like take your time to go and get your first clients or focus on your product. Because a partner like
Mhm.
a legal partner can help you, and during you're working on your business side and acquisition, which is the core, you're working on the legal part, and that the time consuming, so you enable them also to go faster, and help like hand to hand. That was a thing you said that I wanted to catch up, but you
Yeah,
told me.
no, that's exactly right. I mean, you should think of them as someone who can take that boring administrative part off your plate so that you can focus on the important stuff. And, you mentioned costs earlier. I think people think of lawyers as an hourly money pit. Who knows how many hours might be required for a particular issue or conflict. But there is a trend here where lawyers are increasingly offering flat fee services to really encourage you to think of them, as someone you can just pick up the phone and call anytime. And in reality, right, that sort of open communication and relationship might be even better for the sake of your company.
Yeah, like we see that trend coming. You're right. The lawyers, I think that was like it took a time to come, but like this subscription or retainer model, which
Mm.
I think
Mhm.
very, uh, we're not like talking about for big corporation, but like for a startup and entrepreneur, that is very valuable. Like, okay,
Yeah.
I control my budget. I can call Erica or my lawyer for this question. I'm not scared to hang up like the old vision of I would say the lawyer, and that's very important. Like for the new entrepreneurs to have like this
Mhm.
kind of solutions or this kind of contracts put it in place. And that's very like during 1 year, like retainer subscription. Okay, I manage, I control, and then you can start working with lawyers. That's very.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. That's a great way to put it.
You're on mute. Mohammed. You're on mute. You unmute your mic. I was seeing you talk.
Sorry. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That takes us to the next crucial point. After COVID, after the changes that the world has during the last 3, 4 years, how do you see the legal advisor role in during the recession time or economical downtime? Especially, and to give you an example, many businesses were having some plan B or different scenarios of tackling some challenges from a local perspective or regional perspective.
Mm.
But in 2020, we have a global perspective that we have to consider. But how do you think startups and entrepreneurs should treat with these kind of things with lawyers or law advisors?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And especially, that's a great point that many startups and companies in general are global. And it's so easy to just reach new customers, new clients, or even have vendors across the borders. And suddenly you're in this very complicated situation where you're subject to the various legal regulatory requirements of different geographies. So it can be very daunting, especially if you're in a highly regulated field like fintech or something relating to banking or any if you're selling some sort of food or beverage drug product, a highly regulated area. But you can think about your legal advisor or whoever you're working with as a particular function to help you manage the process flow. So if you have one person, it could be a lawyer, it could be an operations person, an internal risk manager, just keeping an eye on what geographies in which you are operating, and then helping you think ahead about, oh, do we need to find somebody in that locality just so we're prepared because we've anticipated a bigger risk in this country versus this country. So you can kind of think of them as your
Mhm.
quarterback, right? They're the closest to your business. They kind of know your general direction, strategy, and then they can put that into play when they're helping you evaluate the risk from place A to place B. So that way you can, as the leader, stay at a high level, whereas your operations person could be a lawyer, could be an internal person, is keeping a finger on the pulse of where those risks might lie.
Interesting. I think that's a very important thing you mentioned at the beginning of replying to that question. That I think most of the startups and business now moving to the global scene, especially that not like having more focus of the local markets or regional markets, but as well
Mhm.
having a much bigger and much global perspective to expand their businesses. And that's honestly that's a challenge or one of the challenges I personally faced long time ago. And this is one of the great things that we're focusing on, having this exposure of global scene in the market.
Mhm.
That's
Yeah,
No,
because
absolutely.
yeah, I
yeah.
think it's underestimated sometimes. Like we can go global, like we're talking about niche, but like each market or countries or even state in the US, you're in. We know you're in
Mhm.
New York, Erica. Like the laws or the tariffs and these kind of thing, like can be different, and it's good. Like
Mhm.
as you were saying, like having like your quarterback just like
Mhm.
behind, like okay, be careful for your decision or your strategy. Don't go there because it's going to be complicated, overcomplicated, or focus on more maybe these states, these countries, and have someone like to tell you that and advise you on that is very important because this has like many impacts, especially right now. We're hearing about like even in UE with all the major one like Facebook coming in and their
Mhm.
compliancy. They're putting like different rules in Europe and Asia is different. US are different, so they're big, so they just have to adapt and put money on the table. But when you're starting, you have to choose: can I go there quickly? Yes, no, because I don't have the team. So that's very important to have, like, to go global, how you're saying, to have
Right.
to be backed. Yeah.
That's a great point too. And this person can also be thought of as a gateway to a greater network of resources. To your point, someone who's just starting out is going to have not only limited resources, but limited time. So, if one is not even sure, do I need to find somebody to address a potential issue in place A versus place B? It could potentially be a huge time sink, right, to try to identify the right person. But if you have one person managing that process, they would be the one to be able to help you make the decision of next steps. And then they would be the one with the network to find you that resource quickly. So that's another way that you can help think about it.
Yeah, and also expanding. You're right on raising like network because you can do some stuff in the US, for example, if you work with him, but you have a network.
Hmm.
Lawyers or legal advisors has network more than like when you're alone. So that, okay, go and connect here and just have insights and take the strategic decision. And talking about strategic decisions, like it has shifted a lot in the fundraising field right now.
Hmm.
That especially our days in 224, like uh, it's a little bit. I would not say complicated, but it has changed the way of getting funded. Like before,
Hmm.
maybe it was more on slides and all that. Now, investors need more traction. We know at Kogia we build MVPs of the first app. That's kind of like a mandatory requirement right now,
Hmm.
technically, to go and prove. But on your side, like financially, how do you see like this fundraising scene has shifted and how to adapt to it? That was like the major question.
Sure, sure, absolutely. So, of course, venture capital remains the most popular and appealing method of fundraising. So, in addition to the large dollar amounts, there's a nice cachet or boost to being supported by, VC firm A, VC firm B, and that can carry a company a long way. Now, that said, everyone knows that venture capital fundraising has slowed down and become a little bit more difficult as the economy has slowly begun to recover. So, one thing that I have been seeing is companies increasingly taking steps to find alternative financing. It's not even really alternative, but people, sometimes I speak to people and they don't want to talk about debt, right? Nobody wants the debt. They want the equity investment. But one of the benefits of debt is you're not giving away a share of your company. And frankly, in an environment where cash flow might be an issue, taking a loan or a convertible note, which doesn't necessarily convert to equity, but might, probably will, could give you some of that flexibility that you need to keep investing in the business and continue growth. So there's even some companies now that are offering debt products actually to specific types of companies in certain industries and verticals. They've found a way to, evaluate, like, for example, I'm thinking of B2B SaaS companies. I can think of a couple of finance providers who focus on that, on those types of companies. But they're able to offer capital efficiently and in a way that benefits both parties. So there are some opportunities, I think, between the traditional fundraising methods. And so it may be worth exploring, what new sources there are right now.
Interesting.
And when you sorry, you had
No,
a
go ahead. Go
no, I
ahead,
was
Damien.
thinking like what popped out is like, yeah, you're right. Like we're talking a lot about more like loans, debt, but I think what can scare a little bit, like not scare, but the entrepreneur has in mind how can you legally also like protect an entrepreneur like personally on the debt?
Mhm.
Okay, it's a debt on them, for example, a C corp, LLC, or whatever.
Mhm.
How like how to if they're legal, not tricks, I don't know if it's a good word, but things
Yeah,
that
things to pay attention
on
to.
the
Yeah.
debt, like to protect, like for example, if someone that has an entrepreneur has I don't know, a family, a house, and that's the first thing that's scared. Okay, I'm going to take a debt on the LLC, but will it go back to me personally? That's one of
Right.
the scarcity that can come with debt. So that's why everyone, oh, I want equity, because equity is no, it's a risk because you're diluted,
Mhm.
but it's
Mhm.
quite risky.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And so, definitely, if someone is planning to take on debt to finance their company, take a look in the agreements for things such as what's securing the loan. So, to your point, is someone being asked to provide a personal guarantee of the money? Are they being asked to provide, some potential claim over a home or other assets? Are they being asked to provide a lot of information about their personal assets? And sometimes, these loan documents can be very lengthy. So I've definitely worked with companies before who said, hey, it would be really helpful to have a compliance summary or some sort of other summary of what my covenants and promises are in here. And it could definitely be worth, taking a minute to comb through to truly understand what it is that you're being asked to promise in the end. That's a great point.
Interesting. That takes us to a challenge, and I saw it from multiple startups and entrepreneurs. Always, when we are thinking about the legal part of a startup or a business, always we link it to the investment or the agreements with the people who fund the business. But it's
Hmm.
very rare that when we find someone is thinking or putting the legal part in terms of the legality of the service between his company and the customer, or between his company and the suppliers. For instance, the terms and conditions for any application or any
Hmm.
technical solution. How do you see this, and how this should be an important thing that startups and businesses should think about and have a legal advisor to drive them on the proper way to make it happen and to protect themselves as well in front of the customers, in front of the suppliers, not only the investors?
Hmm. No, that's a great question. So I'm hearing a question about, when there is an economic downturn, how can a company protect themselves or insulate their interests when it comes to customers or vendors or service providers? And so on the customer side, I might think of companies in a couple different categories. Your company might be the type of company that has a large number of customers where your agreements, sometimes in the form of a terms and conditions on your website that cannot be negotiated, is really the same for every one of your customers. And so you don't actually need to spend a lot of time negotiating. Another type of company might rely on a very small number, right, of very large enterprise clients for whom those enterprise clients have a lot of bargaining power in the contracts, and may heavily negotiate it with the company. And so, to my mind, the risk profile of both of those categories is a little bit different. So if you're dealing with, if you are identifying as a company with many, many, many customers with one agreement or terms and conditions, it is a good idea to continue to review your terms and conditions regularly, just for, the sake of being aware of whether you're keeping up with certain changes in regulation. For example, many times the terms and conditions will include something about data privacy in case, those two policies are not separate. Data privacy in the last few years has become a very hot topic because regulations have changed so rapidly across different geographies. So it is important for terms and conditions or any other type of simple, not simple, but non-negotiated customer agreement to remain updated and specific to what your company's mission and offerings are. And this can be doubly important, especially if you do find that your product or offering is evolving over time. In the other camp, if you are the kind of company that relies on just a few very big customers, it could be worth reviewing those contracts carefully for possibilities of that customer canceling the contract or otherwise not honoring their promises under the contract. I have heard some stories of companies who were in this situation and suddenly a huge enterprise customer said, "Hey, we can't pay anymore. You're done." And that's the last place you want to be, right? When cash flow is a consideration, you're still trying to grow despite the economy. While it may not be able to control these external factors, at least if you're reviewing your large contracts, you will be able to identify where your exposure might be, and even head it off in case you are to maximize or improve certain business relationships. So even if an externality does occur, you might have more notice or you might have a greater ability to renegotiate if needed.
And how important you see it, like from what we were talking before, like with fundraising with a VC or whatever kind of family office investors, how important are these contracts for them? Like what in your
Sure,
background?
no, absolutely. So what's interesting is when I hear, so I don't attend the fundraising meetings, right? I'm here for support.
You prepare.
And I'm here to cheer you
You're the
on. I'm the
quarterback.
cheerleader.
No,
I'm the cheerleader in the next room. Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
But it's interesting because a lot of the feedback I hear is how similar these meetings are and introductions are to dating, right? Because it's a lot of personal interaction, a lot of personal relationship. And, if there's less money to go around, then investors are going to want to give it to people they like and people they believe in. So I would say, even though there may be some uncertainty in contracts, and bottom line, right, at the end of the day, bottom line is what matters. If you do have open communication, not only with your customers, stakeholders, but also with your potential investors, and are able to strengthen relationships that way, I do feel like that could carry a long way, because at least you are able to communicate over time what you think is going well and where you think risk exposure might be.
Yeah, good. So you're
Interesting.
confirming, like in the deck, that the team is important.
Team is absolutely important. Yeah, I think people say, I've heard some very good advice that on the company side, when you're looking for an investor, you should not have to convince them of your thesis. You should not have to convince them that you are the right one to execute this idea. They should already be on board. They should believe in your idea and they should believe in you. Everything else is details. So to that point, even if fundraising is taking a long time, don't lose heart, because if the right match is out there, it'll find you and you'll find it. And there's lots of things you could do to tailor your story or express your numbers or strategy one way versus the other. But at the end of the day, if someone believes in you and you believe in them, it could work out. So that's kind of what I've observed.
Okay. And there's one, because we talked about contracts and all that. One of the great asset, I found, it depending on the industry, but one of the best, well, yeah, good, great asset, and that a lawyer can help on the legal part is the IP. How do you leverage also, how do you put in front, or how do you advise on the IP side? Do we have to worry from the beginning? Of course, there's startups, like if we do on D-Tech or this kind of thing, IP are here from the beginning. But in SaaS, for example, in software, it's we don't think about it too much, or it comes after. It can be on IP on other things. How do you go on IP? Do you say we have to focus, it's a great asset, you have to put it in front, you have to put it in documents, or put your IP on and live? What's your inputs about these IP questions, legal questions?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned IP, because to your point, for many or most companies, your IP, which could be if you're selling a patented product or you have a very strong brand, that's really what is going to carry your business in a lot of cases. And if it's a patented product or process, right, that kind of makes sense. There's a set, at least in the United States. I can't speak to other jurisdictions, but to get a patent, get an application through, there's a pretty set process to do so. And it can be fairly expensive, but if your company is, you know, if the success or product hinges on your ability to protect this patented process or product, then that's what you need to do. I think one thing that's discussed less often is brand and how do you protect your brand. So a lot of ideas start with, hey, wouldn't it be great if we could do XYZ and we're going to call it this? Wow, I love that name. You know, everyone loves this name. Get the website domain, design a logo, you start printing out t-shirts, you know, whatever it takes to get the message out there. And there's actually something you can do early on called a brand clearance process. A brand clearance process is actually doing some research. You can get a lawyer to help you. It's not just searching whether someone has filed a trademark on your brand, but also just general research to see who else is out there that might be similar to your brand. And probably the last thing you want to do, right, is start building your company, get going for days, months, years, and then suddenly have someone come out of left field and say, hey, I've been using this name, this logo, for years. I started using it a year before you, right? The thing about trademark and IP in the US is that it's a little bit subjective whether you know, someone will be able to argue that they had rights to a trademark before you. And so it's worth, again, everything comes back down to risk management, right? It can be worth doing this evaluation before you even get started, because the last thing you want to do is, you know, brands are very emotional. You know, it's your baby. You're creating something new, and then to suddenly have to change it, you know, that's a lot of work and expense and distress that you don't want to go through and shouldn't have to go through. So one thing that I have seen is doing a brand clearance at the very beginning, and that can help you reduce the probability that you have to change course once you've already built something. I think that's one thing I would point out.
To make it more clear for our audience, I think that this is two different topics. Whenever we're incorporating a company, this kind of clarification if the brand name or the company name is used before, or there is a company with the same name, that's totally different than just having like a trademark mark of our brand. In that terms, or by these differences, how do you see these two options or two directions? Even if I have an incorporated company with this name, to what extent is it important to make it registered as a trademark inside my state, or the whole US, or even global markets?
That's a great question. So the great thing about forming a company, at least in the United States, is your company can be called anything you want, really, as long as whatever state you form in, and we've got 50 of them. So any state you form in, as long as there's no other company with the same exact name in that state, go ahead, it's yours. It's actually not necessary for your entity company name to match the brand. You can have a company called, you know, Pineapple Ink, right? And maybe Pineapple Ink sells ballpoint pens. Right. There's no need for the two to be connected. And in fact, if you don't want people to know yet what your company name is, if you haven't chosen it yet, or if you don't want people to know what it is that you're selling or providing, some companies will just pick a random name and say, you know what, we're just going to get going. We're going to help reduce our own personal liability by having all of our contracts run through a corporate form or an LLC. And then once we really get going in the next months, weeks, then we can adapt and start using our brand, which is a separate, to my mind, a separate process and a separate workflow. And so at the end of the day, not to get too technical about it, but if you do want to start operating under another business name in a particular state, it's a very quick filing in the United States. It's a very quick and inexpensive one. So I wouldn't worry too much about being committed to a brand name before you form your entity.
You're right. It's a great simple, but you're right. But for entrepreneur, when you're starting, or when it's your first company, because I was like that happened to me like a long time ago. But yeah, you're right. Like to know that your legal entity name can be totally different than your branding. So
Mhm.
you're right. Like we could brand if we do an LLC together. I don't know. Tomorrow we can name it GEM for our name, but our brand
Right.
will be I don't know, Erika Kaneko, and this is our brand. So it's
Mhm.
different. Just to know it, that's a very good point you're raising here, because it's something stuff in terms. Oh, how do I name? No, the LLC or the entity, you can go fast. You can put something personal on it, or I don't know, a fun fact behind, and then it's different from your brand. And then your brand, you have
Right.
to protect it and market it. That's a good point. You
Right.
raised.
Absolutely. And the flip side of that too is, don't let your ongoing brand process hold you back from forming the entity.
Yeah.
Because the benefit of having the entity just from day one is you can run all of your contracts through it, you can start giving your assets to it, and it shields you as the individual. At least, most companies form a C corp, right? A Delaware C corp is very common in the United States. You get to shield your own personal assets and liability for lawsuits or whatever by having the corporate form. So if you're still working on the brand, that's okay. Just you can make it your name, right? You can make your
Yeah.
your corporation
And there's
anything,
a
your pet's
personal.
name.
You're right, yeah, and there's a personal fun fact we can talk about, because that's something we had. Like we were working on Kogi, on the branding and all that, and then we started
Mhm.
like these first clients coming and all that, and we were like, oh, the entity, and then and we look the entity. Let's do it quick, and then because it also pushes you to go and get these clients, these leads, and so it's important. Like, okay, the legal entity, it's like it's a milestone that you've put it in
Mhm.
place, and that will push you also to make it happen and make it work.
Mhm.
Otherwise, it stays a project, and the project
Yeah.
stays. What we
Yeah.
see in an entrepreneur early stage is like the project stays for a long time. Oh, I have this idea. I'm working on it. No, and opening this legal entity,
Right.
Mohamed's laughing because he knows me about that part. And then opening this legal entity, like that will like, okay, I'm in. I've done it. Let's go. Let's do it. And
Yeah.
that's a good point.
No, I love that. I'm glad you pointed that out because I feel like another part of it is the longer you operate, right? If you are operating for months, a year, years, and you start accumulating customers, vendors, assets, and suddenly they're all under your name, and you say, wait a minute, now it's time for a bank account, now it's time for a credit card, now it's time for employees. um, it will be a lot of work and it will be expensive to start that process of transferring everything to the company. And if you're at that point where suddenly things are changing for you, you're growing rapidly, that's the last thing you want to do is to spend time and money on this admin stuff. And at the end of the day, if you did want your company name and your brand to match, you can also always change the company name. Again, it's in the United States, at least, it's a very quick and inexpensive filing to change the name. So that's always a possibility for you.
Interesting. That before moving to the next point, I need to remind our audience that he can post their questions in the comments to tackle it at the end of the conversation. But let's move to the next very important point for me, honestly, especially in this kind of downtime for economical side, even the global changes that's related to some technologies like AI, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think startups and entrepreneurs should adjust or change their legal strategies to be always compliant and following the latest regulations in whatever country or whatever region they are operating at, even for technological changes like the AI impact we have, or for recession and downtime in the economical side?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. I think that maybe one of the most important things would be an ongoing dialogue about the company and its product and its strategy and outlook. I think the vision of your leadership with whomever is advising you. It doesn't have to just be a lawyer. It could be your advisors. It could be your board of directors. It could be your colleagues who are working on similar projects. And it would be very valuable not only to educate your advisors on the changes in your business in real time, but also to leverage the insights from these other parties who are seeing trends and gathering information across the board and at a different scale. It would be a good idea, if it's not already being done within the company, to designate a person to keep in touch with what are the regulatory changes, or if there is no concrete regulatory changes occurring, what is the conversation doing? How is the conversation about risk or future regulation evolving over time? And so part of it might be responding to immediate changes in law in a particular region. Part of it might be getting ready in advance if, an advisor or your legal advisor anticipates that, the winds of change are blowing a particular way. And so that way, when the law does change, or if general practice in the field changes on the whole, you're not stuck behind, right? It kind of all goes back to thinking ahead and risk management. And I think the best way to help your advisors help you is to make sure they know what's going on in terms of the changes happening with your product, changes happening with the company, and what your vision is moving forward. I think those are three ways that you could really foster that back and forth.
So you mean like there's like for example, when you work with a client entrepreneur, when you know his vision, what she's doing his product, so that means you have this in mind, or we're talking about subscription model.
Mm-hmm.
You work with them like for example a year, so you have this on your mind, so you're aware of the trends and get back to them like, okay, look what's happening. We're
Mm-hmm.
talking about also like this quarterback thing, but that's very important. Like, and you're able, I think, because this is something like on the legal part,
Mm-hmm.
unless you're an expert in your field as an entrepreneur and you're working on that. But most entrepreneurs, to be honest, on the legal part, it's not the main skill, I would say, we see that they have, is that okay, and like saying, okay, be careful, this trend will have this impact, just okay, I'm flagging that. That's very important and related to their vision. They're going to go there, or they want to go there, and say, okay,
Mm-hmm.
look at the trend, it's coming, so it can be like maybe good for you, maybe not. Or like for
Mm-hmm.
example, there's a tariff that will change, these kind of things that can. I think that's important. You're right, to have someone that backs you up on these parts, because you cannot be everywhere, especially when
Mm-hmm.
an entrepreneur is everywhere. But I'm talking maybe for me on the legal part. That's the thing that you okay, but it's important, and you leave on the side.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that dialogue is so key, just to maintain that open communication back and forth. Not to get too in the weeds, but one thing that has worked well with a number of my clients is to just set a standing meeting, maybe once a week or once every other week. You don't have to use that 20 or 30 minutes every time, but at least it's reserved, so that there is an expectation that, oh, I'm going to talk to my lawyer in 2 days. Better mention this, better mention this. And it would be good to find someone who's curious and inquisitive and wants to know, right, actively, what it is that you're doing, what's changed, and what are you planning. A lot of feedback I've heard is during these meetings is, oh, that's a great question. I'm glad you asked it. Nobody's ever asked me that before. Just even if there's no explicit answer, it's good to have somebody who will ask you difficult questions, with whom you can converse evenly like that.
And
Interesting.
and there's we heard about all these companies recently in the tech industry, all these layoffs and all that. One of the big thing when you start is that you have to be in the agility, like switch, pivot, and these kind of things. But it's also with human. It's also something that works with human, like your employees, your first team. It can go, it happens, and it's hard, but have to go to layoffs and all that. How do you? And this is something you don't want to see when you start, or you don't want to anticipate, because you say, okay, because you don't want to attract it, I would say. But how can you like start? You have to build that from the scratch in your contracts, in your company entity. If there's something on the part that will prevent or help you, like maybe go on layouts very quickly and hire times better, do you have to anticipate that basically?
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great question. I think, especially in the United States, we have 50 states, right? So, if you are dealing with separation issues, um, you more or less have to be able to comply with with the employment laws of the state in wherever your employee is based. And so, if you are a company with a significant remote workforce, and employees spread out over many geographies, that can become very logistically difficult, and potentially costly. I think, going back to the initial theme of what role does your legal advisor play, that they're your quarterback, right? They're the one to help you think ahead and say, oh, where are we hiring, where is our workforce located, where might it cost us dearly to have to make big changes in our workforce in geography A versus geography B. And so to have someone who can at least illustrate what the risks might be could help you as the leader set that strategy moving forward. The other part you mentioned is, I think, related to talent, right? Even if there's no layoff happening, it's so important to keep talent engaged and motivated about your mission and what it is that you're building. And talent is looking at you. The leadership's vision and tone and energy is really. I actually used to be an employee engagement consultant way back before I was a lawyer, and so I'm always thinking about this. What is the role of leadership and motivating your talent? And you are so important. You honestly are the number one factor of promoting employee engagement and helping employees feel committed and dedicated and excited about the work that they're doing. So even aside from layoff situations, if times are tight, it's important to make employees feel that they are still contributing and playing a major role in the company. And that can definitely play a part in motivating them to stay and keep giving it their all, even if times get a little bit tough in the
Yeah,
economy.
and that could be like a full hour talk about that. But that can be another session we do. But all the leverage you can have with employee for the motivation on the legal part, on the shares, warrants, stock
Mhm.
options, these kind of things that you have to do from the beginning. Because we do with our investment program we have at Koga, we see companies, some of them don't, but some we were surprised recently that one of them also had, like, they prepared from the scratch, from the beginning, a treasury fund where there's a number of shares
Oh,
for advisors, for the employees, and all that, for other than the founders. That was kind of a consequent. That was a good part, and I thought that was an amazing thing from the founders to have anticipated that, because they have this part that they can just release, and that's a big part of motivation for. We can, yeah. I know you have a lot of tools for that, Erica. You and your
mhm.
toolkit, I would say, but that's very important that you raised also to motivate. Not all talking about the layoffs, but there's a lot of solutions for that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's a great point about thinking about equity, how to reward employees with some sort of equity interest. Setting up some sort of option plan is a technical process. So, if you are a company who's thinking ahead and wanting to establish that early, you anticipate making a lot of hires or wanting to reward a lot of advisors, definitely take a look to make sure those plans are technically being set up properly, because there are tax advantages and consequences to doing things one way versus another. So I'm glad you mentioned that.
Interesting. that's one of the main challenges that most of the startups and entrepreneurs is facing, related to the layoffs. And the opposite thing is, do we need to hire more people to start grow much faster to achieve some extra goals of for our business? But always, every business and all the leaders across businesses should have the balance. Yes, you need to grow very fast. On the other side, you do need to consider the human factor of protecting your team to avoid the layoffs as much as you can, instead of just have a great team and big team in a very small time, and suddenly you need to sacrifice like half of the team. That's crazy. Yeah,
and that's a great point too. Oh, sorry, not to go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
All I was going to say on the last point on the cost savings, at least in the United States too, I see some companies saying, okay, it's very expensive to hire full-time employees. Why not hire contractors? And just one thing to think about is, at least in the United States, a company needs to be pretty careful about who they classify as an employee versus a contractor. Ultimately, those judgments are, again, kind of subjective, and there can be major penalties to misclassifying your workers one way over the other. So that would definitely be something to look at if hiring contractors is a way that you would prefer to staff your company.
Good point. Yeah, I think that moving to the next point, that I see it's very crucial, because this was a debate between me and other partners in my previous business. The rule of having a legal advisor in a company or in a business. How this is definitely important. We'll all agree on that. But the question that might all the entrepreneurs and startups have in mind, how we can do this, what is, or how we can hire or find the best legal advisor to join us, especially if you definitely know that every single lawyer, every single advisor in the legal part, they have different perspective, they advise in a different way, even inside the same states, the same cities. But how can me as an entrepreneur or startup owner define whether this legal advisor is good for my business, and how to put this in the structure of the company to make it much more controlled?
Yeah, so definitely I see different approaches from different kinds of companies. If your company is highly regulated, it may make sense to hire a full-time attorney in-house sooner rather than later. Sometimes you do have investors coming in and saying, hey, we took a look at your business and think it would be best, or we are more likely to invest in you, or we support you hiring a full-time lawyer sooner rather than later. But it's not always economically feasible. And in a lot of cases, a full-time lawyer is one of the last chief, CXO positions that's filled full-time. And so how do you bridge that gap? I think a trend, and full disclosure, my firm does this as well, fractional general counsel or fractional chief legal officer is a new offering that has been cropping up across the field. And so in addition to that subscription model you mentioned earlier, lawyers and firms are increasingly offering this, like a plug and play general counsel, I call it. Your general counsel who you can call on any time to do a variety of different legal things, to, who's familiar with your business and in tune with what it is that you're doing, but isn't working for you full time, but still able to provide the coverage that you're looking for. And definitely seek referrals or ask for meetings, ask for consults. My firm does free initial consults. Just have that conversation. And similar to what I said earlier, if you feel like you have a good rapport and good relationship, that could go a far way.
Do you see this kind of having a legal advisor or a lawyer on board, or whether it's full-time or something else? Does the entrepreneur or startup owner need to change anything in the company structure itself, or he needs to change whatever thing in the regulations of the company, or that's just an easy thing to do or to have in the company plan and structure?
Mm-hmm. Well, if you're hiring a fractional professional. They're just going to come in as a service provider or vendor, basically like any other vendor. And then you can personally negotiate what it is your needs are, and the right person should be able to provide that customized service to you based on what it is that you need. It would probably also help to just have some dialogue to help you evaluate what it is that you really need, right? And it's okay to ask for that guidance or ask for examples of what the practitioner has done in the past to help you make that informed decision about what choice you're going to make. In terms of operational, I mean, a chief legal officer is typically, part of the, or can be part of your operations team. Sometimes the chief legal officer also wears an operations hat because there is this intertwined relationship with your employment function, your product function, regulatory function. But it's really up to you and how you want to be working with your advisor and your lawyer. And I think there's a lot of possibilities for how that arrangement could work. And yeah, it comes down to the leaders and or founders' preference.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and it's also a model that's the talk we'll have next week, but on the financial part, because these other two things like legal, financial, like as you were saying, like fractional. That's a model that's coming. And entrepreneurs, startups, you have to go for me, like I would say, uh, on our opinion, like go through it instead of like full time at the beginning. Fractional, it's a great format. I think for us, for entrepreneurs, startups, it's a great format. Just to wrap up, Erika, before the questions Q&A from the audience, it's the what are now just to talk about the successful successful exit strategy. We know that it's asked from when you want to fundraise. One of the question of the investors or VC, okay, what's your strategy, exit strategy? Do you think it's a shift? It's always the same. Okay, I want to acquisition, IPO. We know you're an expert about that. We just wanted like in a glance your input about the exit strategy, if it has changed, what's the trends right now on this.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And just for context, I worked on a lot of IPOs during the big IPO boom of 2020 to 2020, 2022, 2023. And it, I don't know that there's a one size fits all answer to this. I have heard feedback that if you are going to pitch to VCs, they really want to hear some sort of path or vision to high valuation unicorn IPO, right? They want somebody to be able to say, "Oh yeah, I could see it happening. Here's how." But I've also heard other feedback to say it's okay sometimes to not know, right? It can be equally, if not better, equally good, if not better, to just have a realistic view and vision of the reality of your business and what's going on. And so that goes back to how you're matching with investors if you're thinking about it in terms of investment. um, Doing some research and being aware, asking some questions about what your investor might prefer to hear or might be used to hearing over something else. Not to adapt or change your pitch per se, but just to at least have the context going into the meeting of how the interaction might go, and to help you flesh out your pitch and your story. Yeah, so I don't know that there's a one size fits all answer, but those are some things that I've heard in the course of hearing different stories
Oh,
and feedback along the way.
yeah, for sure. That's complex questions and to be answered, and complex also process. So it's just to have the vision at the start of your exit, but you don't control what will be your exit in 3 years, 5 years, 7 years. But they can be successful ones, neutral, big ones. But it's important that the founders has still a vision about that, because some founders want to create a company from scratch just to get acquisition from a big one, I would say, or another one in the field, or some of them, like the founder wants to go to IPO because this is their dream. So it's important to have a vision, and then I think you don't control what's happening after the story. But you're right. I think Mohamed, you have
Yeah, we have a question. Someone sent us a question, and that I think this is a very good question for the people who still don't believe in the role of the legal advisor in their companies. Does it work for legal advisors if the company needs them to help on the fundraising part to add the value based on the success of getting fund, or this should be like treated as a supplier to we that the business should pay for the service of that lawyer or that business legal advisor?
Okay.
What is
So I'm hearing a question about, it sounds like payment arrangements or fee arrangements for your legal advisor. Is it possible to hire a legal advisor and say, hey, we can only pay you if we raise a certain amount? Or is it important to start paying from the jump? So at least speaking from a US perspective, right? And I'm in New York. Um, Lawyers in the United States, lawyers in New York at least, ethically, it can be very difficult to offer individual legal advice without, we call it consideration, without some sort of compensation. Um, Sometimes there are lawyers out there who will accept equity in lieu of cash payment. Not to get into the details, but it can be a little bit complicated to navigate some of the ethics and technical um, issues that might pop up with that sort of arrangement. So for that reason, although there are other service providers who may, be able to offer deferred compensation, not all attorneys may be able to do so. So, being very conscious about your financial situation is as a very early stage company, that's part of the process of finding the right person, right? It should be someone you trust, someone who's familiar with the work that you need to be done, and also someone who will work with you and at least understand where it is that you're coming from. And so, this situation is different for everybody. But that is, it's worth asking. It's worth asking the question.
Yeah, to jump on that question, that's what we do also because sometimes we help on the fundraising part, but that's the fundraising. It's multidimensional. It's not just there's also the legal part that's where we sometimes work together on to help like the startup we work with, but there's the storytelling, the pitching side, the financial side to be ready to get funded, and then the legal side that comes on when you have like starting having conversation with VCs, and that's where we work together with partners like with you, like Erika, to work on that part. But on the fundraising part, it's multidimensional also to answer that question. The pitching, storytelling, your traction, your product, all this has to be aligned. And then, of course, the legal part when the LOI comes up, shareholder agreements. That's where the legal part comes from. And that you're right. It's just not about commission fees. That is the thing that needs to be done when you have a shareholder agreement to be signed. It's to be signed, whether it's successful or not. It's
Yeah.
something to check because the consequences, you know that better than us, Erica. The consequences about a shareholder agreement can be major.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that up because I guess one last point that I wanted to mention is in addition to shareholder agreements and fundraising agreements that you've mentioned, one thing that I do see is sometimes a startup has been moving so fast, they formed, business is flowing, customers are coming in, vendors are being signed. There's You may have heard of it, corporate governance, at least in the United States, can be a technically involved process. And so, why does corporate governance matter? It matters if something goes wrong. Well, it matters if something goes wrong, and it matters if somebody's giving a lot of money. Because the role of corporate governance is to ensure that your company, corporation, has been properly authorizing and properly authorizing anything that needs to be authorized, and properly basically taking actions in a way that's legally compliant with a particular state's corporate legal regime. Because if your books are not tied up in this way, it is an exposure for you if something does go wrong. So, for example, if you need to let someone go, or you acquire some asset, or a stockholder becomes unhappy with how the business is flowing, corporate governance and making sure your books and records are tidy can play a very large role in helping you address conflict or bad situations before they occur.
Interesting. I think there's a last question, and that's I think that's an easy one. What are the preparations for any founder to prepare before going to a legal advisor?
Oh, okay, that's a great question.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I think
we're good.
I think number one is to, it's okay to ask questions. I think you don't have to go in meeting your legal advisor knowing exactly what it is that you need. I would treat it as a dialogue about, what you think you might need, or even in general, what some of your concerns might be about the business. And then your advisor should be able to ask questions back to you. And then together you can come up with a plan or come up with a more detailed understanding of what services you might need. I think that is, I'm glad you brought that up because that can be a gating item to engaging someone, right? It takes mental power and time to think through, this is a technical service provider coming in. How do I know what to tell them to do? But, they should be able to help you. And, it's not your job necessarily to know every single line of every single agreement that might need to be reviewed. But you're the leader. You generally know, what's important to you, what your priorities are, where your risk exposures might be, and what your vision is. And I think within all that information, together, it's possible to work together and come up with a plan.
Interesting. And you would like to thank you, Erika, for your time, for this very valuable and adding value, replying for our questions, replying for the audience questions. I think that it's time to just share the last update about our newest and latest product we have in Kugia, the Launchpad. I think that's your turn. You like this part, Damien?
You're giving me an ad each time. Yeah, and thanks, Erika, for your great insights. And yeah, just quickly, we launched this Launchpad for Entrepreneurs. It's a program during 1 year where we invest in very early stage entrepreneurs' ID. Also, where we have a mixture where we execute for them on 4 pillars, which is the business side, which we talked a little bit about. On the marketing side, we do all the marketing campaigns for them because we know they're lonely. And on the technical, we're here to build their MVP, the UI UX prototyping, the launch of their app on the market. So we do all that for the entrepreneur in that Launchpad, and then also the advisory part, which Erika is one of our partners on that side that can help on the legal parts. So if you're interested, just have to scan this code, you register, you can go through our website, everything is explained, and then we get an interview just to pitch your ID. We're launching the spring batch. We're selecting only 10 startups in this first batch, so you're more than welcome, and we're available to answer any questions. That was just all for me. I went quick. I'm getting used to pitch it. So that's good. Yeah. And thanks again a lot from our guest, Erika. That was amazing. Very insightful. Thanks a lot. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you so much for having me. This is a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.